Today, what I thought I talk about is the idea of the she in She Stoops to Conquer. It's not merely a simple look at the female characters in the play as you have done in your graduation days. This is a slightly more elaborate. I am not going to say complicated, because if you are in this classroom, then complicated is what you love. And so the She Stoops to Conquer, as I told you, one of the major ideas which interested us in this play as a syllabus material was this idea of she stoops to conquer. Now, before I come to the particular play, before I come to this idea of her stooping, let me just go back to the tradition. You know, in English drama, the tradition of the female protagonist. I particularly do not like the word heroine, because heroine has certain connotations which take us to a certain direction. Celebrate Shakespearean women eventually. But Goldsmith is writing centuries ahead of Shaw, and Goldsmith is giving us a protagonists in fact, who are in many ways defying the boundaries that were created for them specifically by the sentimental comedy. When you have written your answers on anti-sentimental comedy, when you had your discussions on anti-sentimental comedies, the gender identities were not exactly the most significant areas. Anyway, so this issue of identity and this issue of gender identity, they coalesce, they come together, they no longer remain separate, they are not in any way separate issues. So here, focusing on the female protagonist, if you think about all the female protagonists in the history of English drama, Faustus had a mention of Helen. There were no female characters there. By the time we come to Shakespeare, we have a lot of strong female characters, but these characters are all forced to compromise. If you think about the romantic comedies, because we are talking about a comedy here, if you think about the romantic tragedies, even then, if you think about these women who are there, think of Ophelia, think of Lady Macbeth, we end up this idea that she is the fourth witch. I mean, imagine the moment you have a strong woman, the moment this entire patriarchal structure starts to look for ways how to kind of turn that woman into something negative. Witchcraft is, again, the witches are a huge sociological construct, and that in itself is a very interesting discussion. But to call Lady Macbeth the fourth witch is completely problematic. And Desdemona is being murdered out of love. Ophelia is dying because she had caught the whim of a prince. You have look at Cleopatra. She has to be in love, she has to be so deeply in love with Antony, and etc., so on and so forth. So and think about Cordelia, even she has to die. Goneril and Regan, we kind of look at them as negative characters, as villainous characters, but what they're doing is they're simply trying to consolidate their interests, which all men have been doing. But all these women, they have been constructed in certain ways and they have been given identities which have allowed the audience to judge them in different ways. And that judgment is very important, particularly when we are talking about a play like She Stoops to Conquer. You need to remember this idea of identity. If I have not spoken about it earlier, then let me remind you that there are two kinds. You have your own identity, and there is this identity which is imposed upon you. So even with all these characters that we are talking about, we have their identities, and we have how people over the years have looked upon them. We have imposed, we have gifted them with different identities. When we look at these characters, we will look at them from our point of view. We cannot look at them from any other point. We can't really look at them from any other point of view. It has to be our point of view. We might appreciate, we might try to imagine other points of view, but we cannot go beyond our own socio-cultural ethos and be completely objective. That is simply not possible. So when we look at all these characters, we kind of impose certain it's like imposing eco-critical ideas on 17th century texts and something like that, ideas that were not even prevalent in those days. But since we are concerned with these ideas, we kind of look for those ideas in those texts, in those works of art, and we interpret those works of art in our own ways. And here, this is one point, that are we imposing our idea on She Stoops to Conquer, or is She Stoops to Conquer already establishing those ideas? Because I have already told you how it works with the nature-culture divide, the nature-culture opposition, and how She Stoops to Conquer is going against that kind of opposition. And even in case of identity, after the Shakespearean romantic comedies, I mean, imagine Rosalind, imagine Viola, imagine Portia. They are all brilliant characters, amazing characters, but they are all forced to compromise because society does not allow them to be independent individuals. I mean, when you have a wrestler hero like Orlando who writes, well, quite bad poetry, you kind of feel a little sad for the very intelligent, brilliant women who must disguise themselves as men to survive, to save their love, to kind of save their dignity. So that identity construct, that Shakespearean gender identity, is again a very significant area of discussion, but not our area of discussion. So I'll move on to the next significant theatrical phase, which would be the Restoration comedy of manners. The Jacobean I kind of accept as an extension of the Elizabethan, because Shakespeare is writing both in the Elizabethan and the Jacobean period. So, and the next significant period is the Restoration comedy of manners, and Restoration tragedy is hardly worthwhile. But in the Restoration comedy of manners, we again have women who are very artificial, who are forced to be very artificial. The Belinda idea, that these women, they must be completely artificial, they must not be natural. To them, society is a playground in which they will practice all their, let me not become judgmental, but they would not have normative kind of exchanges. They will have a normative relationship, which will actually be the license which allows them to do a lot of stuff beyond marriage. And you know about the Restoration comedy of manners. But if you just stop being judgmental, if you just start thinking in terms of identity, these people are parts of their milieu. These people cannot be anything that their time does not allow them to be. So they have to conform, and they do, and they become the best possible versions of the time, and they are conniving, they are licentious, the word that you have practiced, the word that you have learned when you were talking about the Restoration Comedy of Manners, if at all you were talking about the Restoration Comedy of Manners. But in all this, the wit, the humor, the social construct that we find, the capacity to survive in a dangerously judgmental society is something that needs to be appreciated, because although just pre-Darwin, these people are existing in a space where survival of the fittest is a complete reality, because they must survive. If they are not fit, society will remove them, ostracize them. It's a very, very rough society to exist in, and they do that wonderfully. And in fact, when you're talking about a text like The Way of the World, when you see Mirabell and Millamant have that famous proviso scene, you understand that these people must have such an understanding, clear understanding, in order to survive with dignity. This dignity becomes a very important factor, the dignity that you do not have in the female characters of the sentimental comedy. The sentimental comedy, first of all, hardly comedies, as I told you, very much like 80s, tear-jerkers, as they were called. Sentimental comedies are like that. I mean, if you think about the template of the sentimental comedy, there would be a rake, this hero, this dashing gentleman who is falling in love 6 times a day, sort of a thing. And he marries this tremendously virtuous woman. And of course, when we are coming to the sentimental comedy, men cannot be sentimental and virtuous. Men will always be allowed to be rakish and, the Casanova kind of a paradigm. And the women must carry all the virtue as always. And the problem with the Restoration Comedy of Manners was that they were portraying women as equally licentious, and that is something the patriarchal society could not tolerate. All the pamphlets, all the responses, all the shocked kind of expression that people had, even when you read those texts, if you do read those texts, something like The Country Wife or The Man of Mode, all these plays, if you just take a look at them, you will see you get shocked, because not because of the men, because that's how patriarchy works. We expect men to be like that. We expect men to be rakish, James Bond type. I mean, even in the 20th century we have a figure, even in the 21st century we have a figure like James Bond, to whom women are basically pastimes, and whose conquests are celebrated by the entire known universe. But anyway, women so must bear the responsibility of being virtuous, and the virtuous bride will accept everything that the non-virtuous husband is doing, and the virtuous bride will, it's very much like some of those sentimental Bengali films that we used to have in the 70s and also in the 80s and the 90s, and films which are cringe-worthy. In fact, this woman would be completely virtuous, and this hero, let me call him a hero, because he is the quintessential hero for whom women will fall right and left, and who will be tremendously handsome, witty, etc. And this hero would eventually fall ill, and she will nurture him to health, and she will fall ill. And when she falls ill, the hero would have this instant change in his heart, and he will realize that this woman has almost given up her life for him, and he will become a good, virtuous, boring kind of a person. So that would be the sentimental comedy. Essentially, each and every sentimental comedy would be like that, and people would actually cry. People would actually shed tears. And how can you call it a comedy if you are inspiring that kind of feeling? Let me not call it a sadness. Sadness is a very serious affair. This whole narrative, this whole story, then would be a story of reform, of reformation. How the rakish hero will be reformed, how that rakish hero will become a quote-unquote good human being, someone who will start doting on his wife, because he will probably realize no one else will nurture him to health after this. He gets only one chance, sort of a thing. But anyway, sorry. The thing is that that is hardly comedy. That is hardly anything. That is hardly a proper dignified work of art. And so, and as far as our discussion is concerned, what you need to remember is that these women, they are given no dignity. They stoop. When you think about the idea of stooping, these are the women who actually stoop, because they do everything for their husbands. They have no personal dignity. They have no question of choice. They do not try to demand their right. And that is why, of course, patriarchy loves them. As soon as women are silent, they are good women. I mean, and you know, it's a digression actually. But one of the reasons I love Chaucer is that Chaucer was the one who challenged this idea for the first time in the history of English literature. In Greek literature we have in other literatures we have other such examples, but in English literature, Chaucer would be the first one who would, in English literature that comes out of English soil, that sort of a thing. But anyway, you can probably challenge me on that. Not strictly relevant, because Chaucer is giving us this legend of good women, and all the brilliant texts in the Canterbury Tales. We have so many wonderful women characters who are truly magnificent, who are full of dignity, even with all their foibles, follies, characteristic flaws. Because Chaucer, the humanist, even before humanism was born, Chaucer could look through the veil of gender, and he could actually see the individual. Right? But anyway, coming back to our discussion, so we have these women characters, we have these female protagonists who are not exercising their rights, because legally, socially, being a wife has certain associations, certain legal implications, certain demands that can be made. But as always, that has been negated, that has been completely overlooked. And these, the moment I call them virtuous is the moment I condemn them to a life of acceptance, to a life of conformity. That is tragic. In fact, that is one of the major complaints I have against sentimental comedy, because quite consciously sentimental comedy is making these women stoop, making these women actually less lesser human beings. Because, I mean, of course, if a woman chooses to obey her husband, obey, quote unquote, if a woman chooses to do all that uh, nurturing, that is, of course, her choice. The one thing that I believe in life is choice. So I am not judgmental. I am not looking at those women with any kind of judgment. They are doing what they are doing, even if it's fiction, even if it's not unreal. Still they are doing what they are doing. I have no right to judge them. The persons I am judging are the persons who are constructing those stories, persons who are constructing those identities as model identities for women. They are the ones whom I shall judge. They are the ones you should also judge. People who are giving you all these paradigms, all these models in which ideal women characters are described, in which ideal characters are described, men or women, does not matter. So the moment such a paradigm is created is the moment you are going against individuality. That is the moment when you are going against individual identity. And Goldsmith, in a stroke of sheer genius, is writing a play called She Stoops to Conquer, in which he is allowing the central female character to have choices. He is allowing Kate Hardcastle to have a voice, and that is beyond anything. She Stoops to Conquer, the title becomes almost satirical, because the stooping that we see is actually a parody of Shakespearean romantic comedies, in which the heroines had to disguise themselves as boys. Here we have a rural upper class lady who accidentally is creating a lower class identity and is maintaining that lower class identity, hence the stooping, hence the she stoops. So that maintenance of a lower class identity, that stooping, is amazing, absolutely brilliant. That stooping is what makes this play such a significant play, not the story. As I have told you, that the story itself is almost ordinary, except for the Kate Hardcastle and Marlowe bit. And the other brilliant thing is that along with Kate, we have a person called Constance Neville, and she is the proper heroine figure, who is helpless, who is almost a victim at the hands of the family that has given her shelter. She is in love with a hero who is again more of a hero than Marlowe, who is dashing, who is a gentleman, who is thoroughly in love, but who is also helpless because he doesn't have any money. And the Miss Neville, having the money, doesn't really have the money because the money is in jewels, and those jewels are with Mrs. Hardcastle. And quite wonderfully, there is a balance. What happens is, Kate Hardcastle, I mean, you need to appreciate it from the contemporary point of view, which is difficult, which is if not impossible, because people are expecting a heroine, and what they are getting is a person who is not a model heroine, who does not merely become pretty and get all dressed up like Belinda in The Rape of the Lock, who is passive. That passivity is the most significant thing. That women are expected to be passive. That is a part of the identity. As I told you, in the Restoration comedy of manners, women were not passive. So people had a lot of difficulty, including women. Men and women, they all had difficulties with these texts. And here we have Kate Hardcastle, who is also an active character, who is a person with a voice. Mr. Hardcastle allows her, that allows is there, that there has to be this allowance. It's not a science fiction drama that we are reading, that we are discussing. It's not a fantasy. So in reality, what we have is this rural gentleman who allows his daughter to have a voice. There is a negotiation. She must wear certain kinds of clothing in the morning and a different kind of clothing in the evening because wastage is unnecessary, that kind of a thing that Mr. Hardcastle always says. And Kate obeys him to an extent, and the delightful complication that arises out of this clothing thing, again reminiscent of Shakespearean comedies, is something that creates a completely new plot. But Marlowe has a problem. It's a social problem rather than a medical problem. But Marlowe has a problem. He cannot, be comfortable with society ladies. He cannot be comfortable with the artifice of the upper class ladies. He is much more comfortable with the lower class women who apparently are free of these upper class boundaries, who can actually kind of be much more liberated because they are not bound by these social laws. So when Marlowe finds Kate in that disguise and he becomes comfortable and the whole romantic atmosphere is created, Kate takes this decision of testing Marlowe. And again, this is something, the conquest bit that comes in, that she is the one who toys with her own identity. She is the one who is inviting judgment. Can you imagine if you put yourself in Kate Hardcastle's shoes? What she is doing is something tremendous, something that is unheard of. She is portraying herself in a lower, as a person of a lower stratum. And in that stooping, she manages to find exactly what Marlowe is. Because Marlowe, the Marlowe that we see, is arrogant, is insufferable, who is completely misbehaving with everyone, thinking that this is an inn. So he is behaving very badly with an elderly person. Even if Mr. Hardcastle was actually an innkeeper, you would not imagine, you would not accept such a kind of a behavior from someone in Marlowe's shoes. The fact that she is allowed to stoop by Goldsmith is something which is a bit of a wonder, because no, you cannot really think of any female figure before Kate who is taking an active part in the construction of her future. She would choose who she wants to be. It starts as a game, but it becomes quite serious. I am not going to give you any spoilers as such. I am not going to give you the end or how things become. I would very much like you to read the text as an entertaining text rather than as something that you need to very seriously analyze or anything. It's an entertaining text, read it like that. And think about the implications. So Goldsmith is allowing her to stoop. Goldsmith is inviting judgment. Goldsmith knows that such a woman may not be entirely accepted, but he is still creating that in a comedy, because the comic space allows a lot of allowance. The comic space gives the audience a zone of comfort in which the audience will accept things which they might not accept in a more serious kind of a space. So by doing that, what Goldsmith very, very cleverly does is that he is introducing this very strong woman character. The woman with a voice, the woman with a choice. And if you think about the other three women, I mean, alright, let's forget Bed Bouncer and let's think about the other two. Constance is the foil character. In your character analysis and all that, you have always spoken of that. Constance is a character like that, and she is exactly what Kate is not, because she is also limited by her identity. She is also limited by the idea that she has to survive here. She has to be grateful because she has been given shelter by this family. It's very Shakespearean, isn't it? The two couples, the hero and his friend, the female protagonist and her friend, and the way they have this relationship, the way all the circumstances happen and they all come together, that is quite Shakespearean. That is quite not only Shakespearean, but if you can actually go back to the classical, Menechmi kind of a paradigm, to Plautus, in fact. And Plautus is essentially the model for even Shakespearean comedies, particularly the Comedy of Errors. But Comedy of Errors is an early comedy, so I don't really want to talk about that here. Coming back to Goldsmith, coming back to Kate Hardcastle becomes much more striking when you compare her to her friend, Miss Neville. And Miss Neville is powerful, Miss Neville is everything, but she does not have a choice. And because she does not have a choice, she cannot have a voice. So even if she is desperately in love with Hastings, she can't really do anything about it. She has to suffer in silence. She has to accept whatever is happening to her. And Kate is not willing to accept what is happening to her. Kate will test. For once in this comedy, the woman character will test the man. The female character will test the male character. This kind of testing, this kind of assessment is something that you have hardly had. Always, as I started by saying, that even if you go back to Shakespearean romantic comedies, even if you go back to Restoration Comedy of Manners, this is something that none of these women have had. This is a luxury. And even now, if you look at all the works of art, such a character, not absent completely, but I would say such a character is rare. Such a character, such a powerful character is rare. Agreed that power is a given power. That power is not something that, if Mr. Hardcastle was very different, if Mr. Hardcastle was like Elizabeth Barrett Browning's father, then things would be very different. But this is where Goldsmith comes in. This is the paradigm that Goldsmith is creating, that this is how intelligent women should act. This is how intelligent women should participate in their own lives. not allowing other voices to rule them, not allowing other people to choose for them, but to do something, to establish something. And in the process, she would agree to stoop, not only as a disguise, but she would change her identity. She would adopt a different identity, and she would play on with that identity to the end of the plot, to the extreme end, to the possible end. She would keep on playing that identity, and she would win. She would not allow anybody else, she would not allow Marlowe to go scot-free. And it would be interesting if Marlowe had chosen otherwise. It would be interesting if but anyway, that's not quite the point. But the thing is, this is something that I need you to remember, that when we are talking about she stoops to conquer, this stooping is above and beyond all the paradigms that you could imagine. This stooping is above and beyond all the ideas of womanhood, all the ideas of dignity. Kate is sacrificing her dignity in order to have her dignity. She is sacrificing her identity to maintain her identity, because her identity at the end of the day is not being only Miss Kate Hardcastle, but being an individual, being a person with a choice, a person who has a say in her own life. That is her identity, not the one, not the only one that, not only the one that society has given her, or her father, parents, her family had given her, but much beyond that. So let me end with that. Look at how Goldsmith becomes a very significant point. Goldsmith becomes a major turning point in the history of English drama, because we celebrate Ibsen, we celebrate Nora, which is a Doll's House, which is a very serious play, but way before A Doll's House was even conceived, we have a play in which we have a very strong female character who actually does something, which she is not expected to do. She stands her ground. She is a phenomenon by her own right. So I need you to think about that.